The next stop on our tour around the world today is Rajasthan. That's right, we're going to India with Ellie Cleary from Soul Travel Blog. We're going to learn about the best way to experience Rajasthan. We're going to learn some must-see sights, delicious food, best transportation methods, cultural etiquette, and much more. So come with us as we find Rajasthan's true flavors. After 5 years working in the hotel industry in her hometown of London, Ellie Cleary moved to the Netherlands to work for Booking.com from 2010 to 2016. There she headed up their global accounts team, managing relationships and contracting with major international hotel chains. In 2016, the call to do something related to responsible travel became impossible for her to resist. Since July 2016, Ellie has been location independent. Alongside running the award-winning blog Soul Travel Blog, Ellie works as a freelance writer and consultant for sustainable travel brands. When not traveling or writing about travel, Ellie enjoys yoga, a good book, and scenic train journeys.
All right, excellent. Well, Ellie, it is wonderful to have you here. Welcome to the summit. I am just stoked to hear about Rajasthan and hear about some of your adventures there and what people can look forward to if they want to travel there too.
Oh, thank you so much, Claire. Thanks so much for having me, everyone. Appreciate it. Great to be here.
Wonderful, wonderful. So I'd like to start with asking, how much time have you spent in Rajasthan, and what was your first impression when you first arrived?
Yeah, great question. I think my experience, I guess, was a little bit different from some people. I think for many people, sort of Rajasthan is possibly their first place in India. For me, it was a little bit different. I'd spent some time in India before, exploring more sort of Delhi, Agra, and some of the tiger reserves, but not Rajasthan. But my first impression was definitely overwhelming. I arrived in Jaipur, which is known also as the Pink City. So it sounds super romantic, but it's also a huge bustling city. So essentially it was a lot of dustiness, honking, and being prepared for general haggling as well. So it was definitely a culture shock for me arriving there.
Interesting. Yeah, I think the haggling you're going to find, I mean, I've found it in almost every big city I've ever been to, including New York.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And yeah, this time I spent just over sort of 3 weeks exploring Rajasthan. So typically, I guess people maybe have a little bit less time, but even with 3 weeks, it wasn't quite enough time to see everything. It's a big state.
I can imagine. I can imagine. And so Rajasthan is a popular destination for travelers going to India. What are some touristy things for those that aren't as familiar with Rajasthan and what it offers? What are some kind of touristy things that bring people there?
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the most amazing things about Rajasthan is some of the architecture and some of the forts and palaces. They're really incredible. So you have amazing forts at Amba, which is really close to Jaipur. Then the amazing Marangwa Fort, which is in Jodhpur, and Jaisalmer as well, which is literally kind of a giant upside-down sandcastle in the far northwest corner of Rajasthan. So those are definitely things which shouldn't be missed. Udaipur as well is often referred to as the Venice of the East, and it definitely has a very romantic feel. So these are the things which typically kind of draw people in, and they can get a little bit crowded. And I think kind of an interesting example is Jaisalmer, which is very popular. It's stunning to look at and explore, but it's also extremely fragile as a structure. It was built in around 1156 AD, so it's been standing for a while. But what's happening these days is more and more guest houses are actually being built inside the fort to cater for tourists and restaurants as well, which means that a huge amount of water has to kind of be pumped inside there. So, a simple tip for people visiting Jaisalmer, for instance, is maybe stay outside of the fort area, which gives you, well, one thing, a better view of the fort itself, but is also actually helping to preserve the fort as well, because sometimes what's very obvious, as a visitor there, is that there just isn't the sort of same level of funds and resources to actually maintain some of these monuments, which is a shame. And I think, kind of another challenge with tourism in Rajasthan sometimes is the animal interaction. So elephant rides is still something which are offered there a lot. So they're available at the Amba Fort in Rajasthan, but they're not necessarily well cared for. So that's something that visitors might want to be aware of when visiting. And then another thing which is pretty popular as well in Rajasthan are the camel safaris. And I think people have different views on this, but I mean, from my perspective, I saw quite a few camels which didn't look particularly happy or well looked after. So that's definitely something to be aware of on the camel safari side of things, to really kind of look for operators and maybe spend a little bit more money to ensure that the animals are well taken care of.
Okay.
So those are a few things that kind of popped up.
Yeah, good advice. Good advice. And a lot of times I feel when you're there in the moment, it's hard to distinguish sometimes the difference between some of the organizations that are doing, that are caring for their animals and the companies that are not. Is there anything else that travelers can do? You mentioned, and maybe possibly limiting water use if tourists are using a lot more water than locals might. What are some other things that travelers can do while they're in those touristy areas to make sure that they're leaving a limited impact behind?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So as you mentioned, water use is something to be super aware of. I'll come back to it a little bit later, but I actually stayed in a village community at one point, which really kind of struck me because they didn't have access to piped water. So then you become super aware of kind of what you're using. So that's definitely a sensitive area in Rajasthan. But I think also, in Rajasthan, there's great ways to go off the beaten track as well, which is something we'll talk about. So it's always looking for, those local smaller guest houses or hotels even in the area which are making efforts to be more sustainable. And those are great ways to support, and there are definitely plenty of those options around, even in the big cities. And another piece of advice, I mean, if you find yourself staying in a larger hotel for a few nights, it's always good to go out and support different establishments. So, spending money at local restaurants, at street stalls, different markets. So really generally spreading the economic benefits of the travel.
Excellent. Wonderful. Thank you for that. And so you mentioned getting off that beaten path, getting away from, it's always good to see some of the more touristy things for a day, maybe two, and then, to really experience the culture and get that authentic experience. And so what are some examples of when you went off the beaten path in Rajasthan?
Yeah, well, one of my favorites actually. So we spoke a little bit about the desert side of things and the camel riding. So Rajasthan is known as the desert state in India. It's home to the Great Thar Desert, which is pretty expansive. And a lot of people, they really focus on going to Jaisalmer for the safaris, which unfortunately results in a lot of people all going to the same spot to watch the sunset. So you literally sit there watching the sunset with a few hundred other people, from what I've heard. One thing that I did was I found another place to go and experience the desert in India. So a place called Ocean, which is near Jodhpur. It's just about a couple of hours outside. And there I actually found a village tourism project which had constructed very simple huts for guests to stay in. So this was also the village which didn't have access to running water, but what they'd done is they'd laid on bucketed water for guests as well. And they were actually offering the opportunity to go and stay in the desert for a couple of nights or just to even stay for a shorter time and go out on desert walks. And I really felt there that they were giving a lot more of the local experience. I wandered around the desert for a couple of days and didn't really see any other visitors. So that was really fantastic to be part of that. And then actually another example, not too far from Jodhpur on the other side, so really in central Rajasthan, again, a couple of hours away. I went and stayed in a wonderful homestay where the owner actually took us on some wildlife safaris. Again, like if you think of desert, maybe you don't think of wildlife, but there's so many beautiful birds in this part of India, and many antelopes as well. So that was really fantastic just to discover those places. And there was also at the second homestay, which I mentioned, a place called Chandalaugar. They had a whole women's cooperative working next door who were actually hand-making products for the hotel, for the homestay. So providing basically a direct benefit to the villagers around, where it's still quite difficult for women to get employment, or it's not always socially acceptable, for instance, for women to be working. So again, like some great examples of some of the positive impact that tourism can have. So yeah, those are two really fun examples to actually see kind of a little bit more how rural Rajasthani life was. And then even within the bigger cities as well, Udaipur is probably one of the more touristic spots in Rajasthan, with people kind of flocking there for the romantic scenery, the lake, etc. But even just, the other side of the main bridge in the city, on the quieter side of town, it's called Hanumangat. There's a lot of smaller places to stay with more of a local vibe as well. So sometimes it's not necessarily about going a long way off of the beaten track, but just a little bit onto the alternative side of the scene, which can be really interesting.
Lovely, lovely. Oh man, I can't wait to go.
It's stunning. Yeah, one of my favorite places actually was Udaipur. The scenery is just amazing. So highly recommended.
You glossed over food earlier, and I would really like to learn more about the kinds of food that you would run into in Rajasthan, and what are some dishes that, I'm sure all of them are really good, but are there some top dishes that you have to try?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, one of the great things, personally, I'm vegetarian, and India is vegetarian's paradise. But I mean, in this part of India, something that really influences actually the food is the lack of water. So actually, they use a lot of chili and oil to preserve food. So it does tend to be pretty spicy, the local cuisine. Okay. And actually what you'll find, for instance, is that because there's a bit of a shortage of fresh vegetables, a lot of lentils and dried beans are used, that sort of thing. So the quintessential Indian experience is to have a thali, which is a big plate with rice and chapati, and then small dishes of different vegetables and curry. So in Rajasthan, you also have that with its own unique flavors. So I'd always recommend that wherever you are in India, just try and get the local thali. It tends to be great value as well. So just go easy on the chili, depending on how you like your food. So.
All right, yeah, maybe ease in the first couple days.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, in terms of, sensitivity for stomach as well, don't drink tap water, but personally I tend to drink filtered water in India, which you can put into a refillable bottle, and I've always found that to be pretty good.
Nice. Wonderful. Yum. So, I mean, Rajasthan, I'm sure there's a lot of ways of getting around and getting to, some of these off the beaten path places. What do you suggest is the best way to transport yourself through the area?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, I have a strong personal opinion on this, but obviously everybody, has different time, and everybody has personal preferences in terms of how they travel. I think that you haven't experienced India until you've been on a nice long train journey. The sleeper trains are incredible. I mean, Rajasthan is a huge state, so just to get from Jaipur at one end to Jaisalmer at the other end, it's 12 hours on the train. But one of the things I love most about the train journeys is you get to meet so many people. A lot of families travel by train. They'll often happily adopt you or share their food with you or these sorts of things. So it can be great fun. An alternative, trains do need to be booked in advance. That's the other thing. I think we'll have some resources available, and there'll be plenty of information there, from the practical side in terms of how you can go about doing that. Buses also are widely used. They tend to be a little bit less comfortable than trains, so probably best avoided for super long journeys. Otherwise as well, what some people do is they hire a guide and a driver, and then that has the advantage that you can really determine your own schedule, but of course it tends to be a little bit pricier. And then I guess, in terms of when you're actually in a city, so half of the fun is probably getting around by tuk-tuk or rickshaw, as it's called in India. Just make sure to negotiate a price before you sit down. And actually one of the things that's becoming more and more common is in the major cities they have Ola, which is the kind of Indian equivalent of Uber, and they have Uber as well. And actually those can be quite nice ways of getting around if you've had enough of sort of being triple charged the usual rate. But it can also be a nice way of connecting with locals as well. Like the drivers normally speak English, and it can be nice to actually support them as they're looking to, raise additional income and learn a little bit more about the city as well. So yeah, those are great ways, as well as obviously walking if you can.
Yeah, absolutely. Always stretch your legs.
Yeah, exactly. So really a mixture.
Wonderful. So when planning a trip to Rajasthan and Jaipur, what are some things to consider in the planning process? Is there like cultural etiquette to take into account? And are there any like helpful phrases to know and things like that when you're planning for this kind of trip?
Yeah, well, I think in terms of planning, probably transportation is one of the things to try and plan up front. Booking trains or flights in advance. Flights are pretty easy to book from anywhere. Trains, it can be helpful to enlist a travel agent beforehand. One of the great things about India is that as many people speak English as they do Hindi. India, I think, has over 100 different languages from place to place. Just there are so many different local languages used. So you'll find that a lot of people, particularly in towns, they do speak English, and that's really helpful for getting around. Yeah. In terms of culture, it tends to be more of a topic for women. But obviously the culture is very different, and particularly outside of the main urban centres, outside of Mumbai and Delhi. People do dress conservatively, so it's really important, I would say, particularly as a woman traveling by yourself, to really cover up either in Western clothes or to buy a salwar kameez, which is a tunic and baggy trousers, and to make sure that your shoulders and legs are covered, and that you'll still get plenty of looks because you are from somewhere else. But that can also, that can really help kind of show respect for the culture. And reduce kind of unwanted attention. So I'd say that's kind of a main thing.
Wonderful. Good to know.
Yeah, it also, just helps the enjoyment of the trip and make sure that things go smoothly.
Absolutely. Great. And then do you have plans to travel back and see this place again? And what are some highlights on your list that you have to experience on your next trip?
Yeah, it's always the $1 million question, right? Do you go back to places that you've been before, or do you go elsewhere?
Yeah, somewhere new.
But yeah, for me, I mean, I really love India, so I'll be heading back in August. I'm not sure if I'll be going back to Rajasthan, but I definitely would love to go back to Rajasthan to see Bundi in particular. It's Bundi. I've heard very good things about that. And also Mount Abu as well. So there are definitely spots that I would return to see. Personally, my favorite spot in Rajasthan was Jodhpur. It's quite a big city. It's very beautiful. There's many blue houses there. They're all painted in indigo. And it is a popular spot, but I found the people to be extremely friendly. It's a very relaxed place. And they had the most amazing saffron chai. So tea with saffron, which, it's the only place I found it, but it was really delicious.
Yeah, that sounds wonderful.
Yeah.
Wow. Lovely. I know we covered lots of details about your trips in Rajasthan and Jaipur. Is there anything else you'd like to share with viewers and maybe some future travelers to the region?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, India is sometimes a destination which might seem a bit intimidating. Personally, I love it. I feel that every time I go, I grow as a traveler, so I really learn more about myself, but I also am fascinated by the culture and everything that I discover in India. I think, for this kind of destination, research really helps plan a great trip. So I would just encourage everybody to consider India, whether it's Rajasthan or another corner of it.
Okay, wonderful. I'm also curious, something just kind of popped into my mind. I always try to take a slower trip whenever I travel, and so I try to make sure I have several days in one place to really explore and walk around and see it. But I wonder if Rajasthan is the kind of place where you could have a quick trip, you could plan to be there for a couple days, or is it really better to try to plan several days in case something falls through, or in case in case something isn't going as scheduled? I mean, I'm just wondering if that might happen more in Rajasthan, or if it's a good place to have a stopover for a couple days.
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, I think, because of the size of the state, traveling from place to place does take time. So it's not possible to see everywhere within a week, for instance. What I would also say, I mean, for instance, my first time to India, I actually took a guided tour. There are a couple of companies out there that do have really solid commitments to responsible travel policies. So, that could also be an option. If you have, say, like 10 days set and that you want to see a certain number of places, looking for companies that have a set tour, and they often have, already the transport arrangements in place, and they often have more of a set itinerary. So that can be a way of, seeing more of a destination in set time. Personally, now I'm a bit stubborn in my independent travel. I like to be able to determine my own schedule. But I mean, yeah, it's really up to you. It's also a place where you can focus on visiting, 3 or 4 spots and take, 3 nights in each of those, as opposed to trying to cover a huge distance over a short period of time.
Nice, wonderful. Okay, so you mentioned the first time you went to this area, you went on a guided tour. I'm really curious. I know a lot of viewers are probably really interested in taking guided tours. Maybe they're not quite comfortable enough yet to kind of go off on their own and do a solo trip. So I'd like to hear some advice you have about picking the right guided tour, and any questions that you might ask that company before you book with them.
Yeah, I think that's a really great question, Claire. And I think particularly, for somewhere like India, where it's obviously a big country, even particularly one state, there's a lot to see. What's interesting is that there's a huge number of companies out there offering tours. And what the product offering is very different from one company to another. So there'll be plenty of companies, for instance, that will do more kind of coach tours, and people will be, in air-conditioned transport for most of the time, etc. Personally, what I like is I really look for a company that has a clear, sustainable travel policy. So 2 of the big ones out there that I know really are very vocal on this topic are Intrepid Travel, who I actually traveled with the first time to India, and G Adventures as well. They also have similar commitments. So that ranges across things to not riding elephants, to making sure that they employ local guides so that you're really getting the local knowledge as well, to trying to use local hotels and taking you to local restaurants. And both of those companies as well have charitable foundations where they actually set up projects or support projects in the company as well, in the country as well. And that means as well that by choosing to travel with them, you're actually supporting local initiatives as well. So it could be like it could be a local craft foundation which is employing women from a particular village. Could be different kinds of projects. Could be schooling initiatives, that sort of thing. But what I particularly like about both of those companies as well is that in India they use local transport. So you're in a group of people and you have the advantage of things being prearranged, like the train travel, access to the major sites. You have hotels booked as well. So you have the itinerary ready made, but you still get to experience travel around India to a similar extent as you would as an independent traveller. So you're travelling by trains, sometimes by bus. You can take boat trips as well. So so if you're short on time and if you don't have time to plan everything in advance as well, then that's something that I definitely consider. And again, it can as well be a great way to get to know a country to start with. And then once you've got a bit more familiar with it, then you can go and explore on your own as well.
Absolutely. I feel that way about food tours sometimes. I like to book a good local food tour in the beginning of my trip, and then I go back the next day, and that now I feel a little bit more comfortable in that neighborhood. Then I feel like I can go and explore, and so I feel like this might be a good way for some travelers and some viewers to kind of get the lay of the land, like you said.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's actually a great point. Even if people want to travel independently and don't want to do a longer tour of 1 to 2 weeks, it's actually very easy to find local guides when you're there, and to visit, to either go with a local guide to visit a particular project or a particular place, or to go on a food tour in a city. There's some amazing food tours out there in different cities in Rajasthan as well. That's how I discovered the saffron chai. So, so yeah, even, in different ways, employing local guides can be a great way as well to support the local economy.
Yeah. Is there, did you find a local guide while you were there? And I'm just kind of curious if there's a way to figure out if they're, a legitimate certified guide, or, just a friendly person that wants to show you around, or maybe someone who might not have the best intentions.
No, absolutely. It's really important to, personally what I do is I look for companies in advance. So the guide I used, for instance, in Jodhpur, it was a company called Virasat Experiences, who were recommended to me by a hotel owner in Jaipur that I knew, and had good recommendations from, etc. So I booked that online in advance. In India, there will be a lot of hustle for tourism business. A lot of people approaching you at train stations, a lot of people approaching you at different attractions. I would say it's very important, particularly if you're a solo female traveler, to check people's badges, for instance, that they're using. And if possible, always try and get recommendations from hotels that you're staying at or from other travelers that you've met, just so that you're getting the real deal.
Well, thank you so much for sharing your insight into Rajasthan and Jaipur and this amazing, sprawling place to visit. Yeah, and I can't wait to share more and to hear about your trip in August as well.
Oh, thank you so much, Claire. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.